Few minutes we'll be watching JannLee playing variants only, but look what's happening here. We have reigning world champion Yasugi99 playing some casual 1-0 crazy house against the former world champion R12. And Yasugi99 is leading by 15-14 when we get a quick glimpse of the action before the match between JannLee and VariantsOnly starts. Surprisingly, I think VariantsOnly is warming up by playing some chess. And it seems like in this game, Yasugi got the better of R12. He has a huge amount of light pieces, and if only he can find the time to place them on the board, he will be clearly better. Okay, picking up the annoying f3 pawn here, and Yasugi will win on time. So 16-14. Both players have been experimenting a bit with their openings, so I don't expect to see these openings in the World Championship finals later this year. But who knows? Yasugi is a great improviser. I thought I saw JannLee online just a while ago, but now he's not online, so well, I suppose he'll be back. Black looks weak here on c7, but he's ready to give up his queen. Looks like a very crappy position here for Black. Black loses his queen and doesn't have any compensation really for the queen. White tries to finish Black off by sacrificing a couple of pieces. The rook is hanging here. And R12 wins. I was a bit surprised there in the opening, by the way, because I think after this, isn't Black supposed to take here? But what do I know? White king looks safe enough. Or should I say, looked safe enough. Really messy position here. Black isn't threatening anything really, because the d pawn is pinned. We're just grabbing some material. I see that JannLee is back online and it was mate on d7. Next move. Yasugi in the lead 17-15, and maybe they stop because they know that we have a match between JannLee and VariantsOnly. VariantsOnly still playing his game, but it's only seconds left here. I know JannLee is from Australia, but I'm not sure where VariantsOnly is from. It says, the flag says Russia. And if I read this correctly, it's Alexander Ovechkin, but I don't think it's the hockey player we will be watching tonight. So, the players are seated, and hello there, Zaraza. If we take a quick look at the overall standings, we find VariantsOnly in 11th place, and JannLee got a really nice warm-up earlier today when he beat Oppervesen 7-3, very impressive. And Brothfish says he can feel 10-0 is in the air, and actually I think we will see a very big winning margin here. As you can see from their previous encounters, JannLee is in the lead 67-11, and it would be a huge surprise if we didn't get a big winning margin here. So JannLee is white. Hello everybody in the audience. So a little trick here, because if you play c6, you can take on d5, and if the queen takes, you have knight at c7 check. So maybe provoking some passive reaction here. I don't like the pawn at c6 move at all, because it's such a passive move. You're basically wasting a pawn here on c6. And this is going to be a chess-like game where white simply has an extra pawn in hand. Just make sure there's no opportunity for black to play c5 and deliberate himself. And of course you don't trade on d5. That will allow the c6 pawn to get back in action. Simply play some chess here. And what's a useful move for white here? I'm not sure. You would like to develop the dark squared bishop, maybe. Maybe get this bishop back to d3, maybe play a3 just to have b4 covered. And this is obviously annoying for black. If you compare the pawn on e5 to the pawn on c6, you see that white is better, of course. One interesting move here is knight f4. And when white wants to continue, queen takes g4. You could consider taking on h5, because if rook takes, The knight is hanging, and if black plays something else, you have knight takes g7 check. Although knight takes here is a bit murky. I think this favors white. It should. So maybe white will close the H file somehow. At some point you might consider taking twice here and pushing the E pawn and knight at E5 check. Maybe that's a way to force your way through. Question is what you take back with. It's always nice to have your queen here in the vicinity of your own king. Threatening the knight and also giving the king a knight square to retreat to. The immediate danger for the black king is over. And maybe, just maybe, black can make use of these open files. I thought black would take maybe on f6 before. This doesn't make as much sense. Maybe check here first and then take on f6. Because the king can always run here. And the material clearly favors white here. I was a bit surprised I didn't just go back. But maybe he feels safer over here. Yeah, the time is low, but still 20 seconds is a lot of time. You could play an entire game in 20 seconds. Or even a couple of games. And obviously you get extra time here every time you move. So I don't expect JannLee to lose on time here. He's putting his extra material to work. But he's very low on time indeed. This just feels a bit unnecessary. Now the position is okay for black. In fact, black is probably better here. Black has the safest king. And the white king is in big trouble. Yeah, simply taking c3 here. You could pick up the rook. Put it on d2, and things will soon promote here. Last desperate attempt there by JannLee, but he's getting mated. A surprising start there, because JannLee was much better. I mean, around, let's say, somewhere here. Maybe it's better to take with the bishop, yeah? mean, here is clearly winning, clearly winning. I don't know what happened. You could go back to h1. This was a bit unnecessary. And even here, why not just go back to h2? And then things just deteriorated. And black got safe and retaliated. Okay. Bad start for JannLee. Let's hope he gets angry. They're playing a e4, e5 opening here. And JannLee is a master in this kind of position. Well, we can only speculate. Sometimes even the best players make mistakes. That's just the way it is. Considering this knight on a5 is so far away from the action, I'm almost tempted just to take on f7. Just because. So I think JannLee got VariantsOnly just where he wants him. Typical positional game here where JannLee's better understanding of the game. Probably decide matters. But he can't think as much as he did in the last game. That's what cost him the game. He spent too much time thinking. So the knight on f5 breaks the connection between these bishops. But now the queen becomes a target, maybe knight d4, yeah. And the g3 square is taboo for the white queen because of forks on e2. So now white has to be careful so he doesn't get forked here on e2 by a pawn. Black might consider just taking on g2 and then forking on e2. Yeah, of course. This move looks silly because it's on a dark square and even enhances the pressure black already has on the light squares. So black wants to trade a bishop here on e7, a bishop for f3. He has all the time in the world to take on f1 whenever he likes to. But maybe this is the time to take, because otherwise white will take on e2. I would have considered queen g5 instead, because sometimes you can simply sacrifice on g4 and put the bishop on f3. Now it will take a while for black to find his way through the defenses. Yeah. JannLee looking to trade his rook for the bishop. So maybe bishop f4, pinning the knight. Or you could even take there and take on h4 maybe. Yeah, because you have bishop f3. And this attack looks devastating. Black probably just takes the knight. We'll check. No, it's mate here on h5. Never mind. 1-all. Knight f4 instead of knight f6. Well, let's take a quick look. Knight f4 instead of knight f6. Knight f4 looked good. I wonder about my suggestion. This also looks good because you do have the threat of taking on g4. But knight f4 was indeed very strong. Good suggestion there. It's 1-all. And we see a very strange opening here. What happened here? So check on e6. And the blocking pawn on e5, it looks just excellent because now all the white pieces are free to wreak havoc in the black position. And I mean, queen c6, you have bishop b5. So if you go to e6, you simply take on a6 and then you have a fork on c7. Where the hell is that queen going? You need to go to a5 probably. But then you can maybe just take on a6 and play b4 and the queen is trapped, or you lose the pawn on c7. So black is trying some fishy attack here. Giving up a queen for more or less no compensation whatsoever. I can understand what JannLee is thinking here, because maybe he doesn't even want to take the queen. Maybe he wants to take on a6 first. Just to get that extra square, because if you take here, you cannot take with the queen because of the fork here. And let's say bishop takes, pawn takes, yeah. Knight takes the queen. The b7, a7 squares look weak. Maybe even just queen b7 and pick up the pawn here. You could even take the rook if you want to. And then rook b8 and take the bishop. So a lot of useful pawns there for white. Looks in great shape, I'd say. You can simply retreat, and if pawn h3, you have pawn f3. No worries. I should mention that there are no tricks. King f1. Okay, he just sacrificed his queen. This is very forcing, and I don't see any dangerous checks. So maybe this is simply super good for white. Queen is covering e4, so you can relax a little bit. So the c7 square is now open for checks. Rook check, knight check, mate. Very bad game there for variants only. And JannLee taking the lead 2-1. So one advantage with putting the bishop here is that black cannot move the e-pawn. So fiat shadowing is a decent option. Black doesn't have any problems so far. Both players getting ready to jump into e4 and e5 respectively. Let's see who benefits more from this. Black avoiding the trade here on c6, which would double his pawns. He hits the c2 pawn. But to be quite frank, I'm not sure what the idea here behind the knight move is. Because I think a3 looks... Okay. I don't really like taking on e4 because it brings the d pawn closer to the king's position. But now at least black didn't get the chance to cripple the white pawn formation. But it could go back this way. Another interesting option would be to take on c2 because there are forks on d3 and also maybe a pawn landing here, and then all of a sudden black takes on e5 and trades queens, and I'm smelling a mate here. So JannLee is really good at spotting these occasions where you need to be precise. He doesn't indeed take on c2 here. And I would probably have preferred to take with the queen. I don't know. Never mind. King looking wide open. Possibly take on e5. So what has black achieved here? Let's say If you take on e5, check with the rook, grab the knight, put something diag here on g2. It's very close to mate then. You don't have a diag to put on g2. Not quite yet, but soon you have it. And JannLee, you better speed up. So there is a mate in the corner if black can get his hands on a heavy piece. So the rook is hanging. I was thinking take the knight and check on e2. Black needs to be careful here about checks in the corner. And if white is careful here, he might win this game. Yeah, JannLee just overstepped the time limit there. I'm pretty sure he was enjoying a nice advantage. Somewhere here. No, it does seem like white has enough defensive resources here. Taking with the knight there seems bad. Yeah, taking on f4 was probably the last chance. Okay, back to the game where the players are 2-2. And let's have a quick recap of the opening. This is a common piece sacrifice, but now there's no piece sacrifice anymore. This looks a little unusual. I would probably play d5, yeah. And if you take on d6, you take with a knight. And then the question is if white's extra space means anything or if this queen is just a weakness. Interesting move, leaving the pawn on c3 en prise. But I think maybe there were tactical tricks. You could take on h7 maybe. and then take on c3. So black gives a piece for 2 pawns here. What's happening here? It's very weak over here at the king side. Simply knight h5, and it's difficult to protect g7. Because rook g8 you have bishop takes h7. And I wonder what black has in mind after bishop takes h7. Okay, we see a queen trade instead. At some point here, white might just take on h7. Let's say take on h7, pawn takes g5. What is this? The rook is hanging. And now you have threats like rook at e8, and the knight goes back with check, and it's mate on e8. And that's a real threat. Seems safe to take the pawn. Black could check here with the queen and pick up the knight, but it doesn't help him much. Because white will only put a pawn here and then take on d4. So if you take here, black will take on e3. But is this really anything for black? Surely you can take here and take on h1, but then the checks will end pretty soon. So this covers a lot of important squares here. No more checks. And JannLee figures that his extra material will decide matters. And it's made on d6 with a queen. He's got the whole world in his hand, white. The whole wide world. So JannLee takes the lead 3-2. So I would just go back, but also placing it on f5 might be an idea, but why not just retreat to h5? It's always nice to pin knights with your bishops, because You decide when to trade them and when to keep them. And that's super aggressive by white, but probably overly aggressive, because you see the weak squares here that could quickly become a problem. Let's say you put a bishop here on e4, hitting c2. I don't quite like the look of this. So now the h5 is open and h3 is weak. Threatening probably to take on f3 and then knight h2 followed by knight at f3 check. And you could probably just check on f3, knight takes, pawn takes, and if queen takes you have knight at h2 again. But I suppose you could prepare it a bit by knight h2 also. So a couple of pawns here would be devastating. Where does black get his second pawn? Maybe here on c3. White moved his king instead. I liked it when the white king was at e1 instead. I don't think bishop b4 check was the best option for black. Because the bishop also covered e5. Oh well, black is still better. Yeah, winning 13 games against JannLee is quite a feat. I myself have never won a game against JannLee. Not that I have played many, but I've never won. Interesting observation there by Oppervilsen. He thinks that VariantsOnly messes around with too many openings and he should focus on fewer lines. So black would like to play queen d5, but then c7 is hanging. And now this bishop check picks up the knight on e6. Black is super safe and he has this ongoing attack. This is good for black. So threatening knight at f2. And d7 is probably safer because you have both c5 and e5 covered from knight checks. I see no reason why not to pick up the rook here. Yeah, simply take the bishop. Knight check is coming. E3 is hanging. JannLee is just playing some safe moves to gain some time. Black is completely defenseless. Maybe a pawn check here. King retreats. You pick up E3 with check as well. Hi and welcome, Masiha Bagiri Tana. So that little bishop would be lovely to place on E4. Right now. So JannLee takes the lead 4-2. And I have a feeling he's warmed up by now. So we see the same variation we saw the game before. Looks like preparation from VariantsOnly. He played D5 there. And once again, he doesn't take on C3. He gave a piece on C3 and then picked up D4 then, but this is an interesting pawn thrust because the white king is bound to end up on the king's side, and then it's always dangerous when your opponent starts pushing the h-pawn. Black is happy to give up the knight here. Even though he loses a pawn, a bishop on d5 looks really, really strong. Yeah, the bishop on c8 doesn't have a very bright future here. Where do you put this? Although it does protect or semi-protect the vital pawn here and the square here. So I mean, it could get out of the prison in the future. But meanwhile, white is playing with 4 pieces on the king's side, and black really only has 2, maybe 3. And now h5 is hanging. I think someone once said that bad bishops defend strong pawns. So white has a lot of options here. Black gives a piece for a pawn. So instead of retreating here, when black could have picked up c3, JannLee doesn't spend much time. He simply gives his queen for ample material compensation, and he leaves black with only one idea, and that is to push the pawns here. But the black king is in jeopardy after pawn at g6. How do you defend the black king here? Can you even defend the black king? The black king will have to take care of himself. And this closes the d file. No escape towards the queen side for the black king. And I don't know where to put the black king, because if you go here, you have knight takes e6 check. Now there are stuff like knight at f5 maybe, followed by another knight to d5. There are so many options here for white. Maybe this is the clearest. Yeah, you cannot take back because of bishop takes. And this is almost mate. So VariantsOnly simply resigns. Not a big success for that opening. And he switches to his a4 variation. Okay, let's see how JannLee handles this. And I think someone mentioned earlier today what a miserable piece the queenside rook is, so why not trade it as quickly as you can, because it rarely even moves in many crazy house games. The pawn setup here makes a lot of sense when white has his bishop on b2, because this bishop is biting in rock. Maybe rook at h6, putting the question to the knight here on h4. Where are you going? Where are you going, my friend? And it looks like the knight is trapped. And getting a rook for a piece isn't much of a material gain, but now black is about to win some material. Although c7 is hanging, so how do you do this? Bishop takes here, the queen can move around to g6, hitting the g2 pawn. The white forces are a bit in disarray here. But g2 is hanging, and if white takes here and black takes on g2, it looks ugly. But I mean, now surely you play just h3. This looks like a mistake. Looking bad for white now. And this isn't much of a threat, because the knight can land on f3 if white moves the bishop. Question is, do you maybe play bishop h3 just to connect the rooks and protect the g2 pawn? Yep. So white hopes to get a knight maybe for the h6 square. But no, he didn't win the a8 rook anyway. I'm not sure how dangerous it is to lose the queen here, because you do have knight f3 check then. And notice that the rook on c8 is covered, so you can take here, maybe offer a queen trade on g6, and then once again the knight is landing on f3. Yeah, what are the odds that VariantsOnly will pre-move a5 the next game? So simply knight f3 here. Hopeless for white. And let's see. a5 indeed. So a bit of a tilt mode here for VariantsOnly. But I should mention that the a4 or a5 line has served him well in this candidates tournament. He won a lot of games with it when it was on tilt. So a very simple, very primitive plan here for black, but why not run this h-pawn up the board, try to weaken the light squares here. Yeah, I seem to recall he did well in a couple of matches with the a4, a5 tilt variation. This is looking dangerous for white, I think. The rook, the bishop, and the queen can enter. And black only gave a piece for a pawn to achieve this. I suspect that black has compensation here. This knight isn't doing so well on e2. It has to move somehow. But if you move here and queen h4, you would have liked to have a bishop for g3 maybe. So instead white finds an attack of his own. And black needs to sacrifice his queen. The threat here being pawn g6, followed by knight f4. Sometimes there are tricks like knight h3, but right now white can take, and I don't see anything decisive here for black. So what about pawn g6 now? Isn't this just winning? I guess the answer is yes. Let me just check one quick variation there in the end. Because the question was what happens after the king goes here, but you don't play it like this when black can survive for a while, but instead you put the rook on f6 like this, and it's made in a couple of moves. For instance, king g8, queen f7, or yeah, well the important line is this. Checkmate. Okay, let's get back to the game. This is the last game. And we see the same line again. Yeah, exactly. Queen d8 and a double checkmate, if I'm not wrong. So basically the same line, but with tempo more. Just for fun, let's show the line that Operavision was mentioning. Sorry. If black goes in this direction, there is a very cute mate here indeed. Queen d8 and double checkmate. Yep. So JannLee went to the fridge, opened a can of beer. I don't know, he's thinking anyway. A very primitive setup here by white, but I mean g6 is weak. So this forced white to put a pawn in a passive place. The rook is a sitting duck, but it will always get a piece at least for when it gets trapped. A nice square to put the knight, blocking the g pawn, and well, just look at the tentacles of this octopus. Maybe he's playing right after his visit to the club. I don't know. Obviously, bishop c4 is nothing. You just take it and you take the queen. What is this? Just looking super bad for... super duper bad for white. White can check here and pick up the pawn with the bishop, having absolutely everything covered. Or it's almost mate even. King takes here, maybe you check on b1 and then check here with the bishop, and then you can take, yes, it's mate. I wonder why I didn't close the exit. So this works as well. You can take here and put the rook on d1. Everything comes with check then. Check on d1. So closing this exit. Queen d1 looked like a forced mate to me, but simply picking up a piece. If you take on a2, you have the queen d1 thing again. Just take the knight maybe. Threatening queen at e1. So the bishop is covering g8, there is no smothered mate, and I'm suspecting that JannLee has too many queens here. Nice little finish. Checkmate. Congratulations to JannLee, who takes this 8-2. Let's just take a quick look at the end there. I was thinking queen check here, but apparently there's something quicker. And indeed, pawn at e2 is quicker, but now you should simply check on d1 because this is forced mate. And it doesn't matter what you play here, you simply check here, and if you go in this direction you have knight b4. Oh wait, you do like this, yeah, bishop check here and knight check here, and otherwise you simply, well, you can check on the last rank and play bishop e2. It's mate. Thank you so much for watching. And do we have any more this weekend? No. Tomorrow is Crazy House Nations Arena. But on Wednesday we see Zixon playing Clearcast. Unfortunately, I cannot live stream that match, so I hope someone else will. Maybe I will be back on Thursday when Bugzilla is playing 264 Brock. But I can almost promise that next Saturday I'll be watching JannLee Blitz Bullet, if that match takes place then. So sit tight. I will try to find someone to raid here. 264 broke. Yeah, the